James Garner was not the type to instigate altercations. He was known in Hollywood for being composed, professional, and highly regarded by nearly everyone he collaborated with. He was a punctual performer who understood his lines and was kind and friendly to everyone, including the director and the lighting crew. People should have listened to him when he expressed worry about someone, but they chose not to. Garner cautioned people about one actress in particular. She was graceful, legendary, and a legend in her own right. He made it plain behind closed doors that there was something about her that simply did not set well. And for years, he was disregarded. She had won over admirers, won over the press, and made a career out of being unafraid, sophisticated, and unavoidable. She was everything that Hollywood loved on the surface. However, James Garner had witnessed an aspect of her that was rarely overlooked. However, once it did, everything was different. Stories from other performers, directors, and even crew members didn't start to come out until years later. Garner's silent admonition seemed less absurd all of a sudden. The reality that he had been correct all along actually began to take shape. What precisely transpired between James Garner and this indestructible figure? He spoke up because of what he saw. What caused Hollywood to wait so long to believe him? Understanding James Garner's significance to the world is necessary to comprehend why her warning was so unexpected and simple to disregard. Not every actress was Lauren Bacall. She was a member of Hollywood's elite. With her smoky, deep voice and her iconic arched eyebrows, she redefined what it meant to be cool, self-assured, and totally in charge from the first time she stepped onto the screen in the 1940s. After her first appearance opposite Humphrey Bogart in Have and Have Not, everything changed. They had a great on-screen and off-screen relationship, and Bacall soon rose above the status of a rising star. She came to represent strength, glitz, and mystery. The critics loved her. She was adored by fans and regarded by studios. Bacall was notable for her witty remark, her strong character, and her refusal to follow anyone's standards save her own in a field that was fixated on youth and compliance. She had a sort of magnetic pull that helped her progress through the industry and build a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense woman who knew precisely what she wanted and typically got it. She was described as refreshingly honest and ferociously brilliant in interviews. She defied the status quo, voiced her opinions, and refused to be labeled as a sidekick or damsel. Before the term had even gained use, she was considered a feminist icon by many. But beneath all of that glitz and glamour, there were murmurs, the kind that didn't make it onto TV interviews or magazine covers. She was occasionally characterized as aloof, domineering, and even patronizing by those who worked with her. In private circles, her name was a warning, but you wouldn't hear it from her fans or witness it during her concerts. Quiet, subtle, but authentic. Despite this, those rumors were typically dismissed because Lauren Bacall was Lauren Bacall. Being brave and unrepentant was the foundation of her entire identity. Her self-assurance inspired others. However, it was something different totally to others, including one well-regarded actor. James Garner, too, noticed the change. It resonated with him. Additionally, he was unable to keep it to himself once they collaborated. That was just the start, though. James Garner and Lauren Bacall were already well known on their own by the time they ended up collaborating on the same production. Garner's easy charm and maverick had made him a household name, and the Rockford Files had solidified his position. His calm, easygoing demeanor and dry wit disarmed even the most stubborn individuals, making him the guy that everyone adored. He was renowned for treating all crew members with dignity, including directors and extras. In an egocentric town, Garner was grounded. With Garner as her ex-husband, Bacall played a Broadway star who was being hounded by an obsessive fan in the 1981 psychological thriller The Fan. Two seasoned pros should have worked together seamlessly, but Garner knew something wasn't quite right very immediately after production started. There was no explosive tension between the two, according to those close to the production. On the surface, it was discreet, professional, and cool, but beneath that, there was an unavoidable quiet friction. Garner was accustomed to scenes that had a familial vibe. Bacall added something unique. She was exact, picky, and occasionally contemptuous of anybody who violated her rules or questioned her authority. Everyone was on edge because of her energy, even though she didn't yell. Garner never attempted to overshadow her or engage in power disputes. His style wasn't like that. However, he also didn't act as though anything wasn't functioning. It seems that Bacall had no desire to change her strategy for the sake of unity. She made sure everyone else was aware of her standing. Others on the staff started talking behind closed doors. Rumors circulated that Bacall was altering lines on site or challenging the director's authority during blocking. Although he was unwilling to raise a commotion, Garner was becoming more and more irritated, not because he required preferential treatment, but rather because the work itself was deteriorating. Later on, he would allude to the unpleasantness of the encounter without explicitly naming anyone. What he was talking about, however, was clear to those who knew him and the set. Not only did Bacall's attitude affect him, but it also affected a number of other people who worked on the movie. What was even more awkward was that Bacall failed to see the issue. To Garner, it was something quite different, but to her, she was just being straightforward, professional, and efficient. Throughout his career, he has collaborated with others who were strong-willed, brave, bashful, and unconventional. Instead, he perceived control in Bacall not the sort that commands respect, but the kind that alienates others rather than confidence. Garner, however, would not remain silent indefinitely and kept much of it to himself for the time being. James Garner never had a reputation for making fun of others. In addition to being respectful and discreet, he was nearly averse to rumors. Therefore, it meant something when he did publicly criticize someone, albeit in a general way. And years after they collaborated on The Fan, he was scathing when he eventually spoke his opinions about Lauren Bacall. He did not fully criticize Bacall in his memoir, The Garner Files. That was not his style, but he was clear that their time together had been challenging. He said she had a propensity to look down on others around her and was shrewd and protective. Though he refrained from naming anyone or making charges, it was clear that her actions had made an impression, and not a good one. Working with her, he recalled, was like treading carefully. She didn't have any tolerance for compromise and expected everything to go her way. Garner found her attitude exhausting, as he valued kindness and teamwork. It was not only her behavior that disturbed him, but also how readily others accepted it. Her status, beauty, and legacy caused others to ignore what was happening in front of them. And that was nothing new in Hollywood. In the past, prominent people have been pardoned for actions that no one else would tolerate, particularly if they had a stellar resume and a big list of devoted followers. There was no controversy or backlash in response to Garner's comments. Actually, the majority of people ignored them. Bacall was, after all, a legend. She had married Humphrey Bogart, worked with the greatest, and made a career out of being fearless and unrepentant. It was considered a sign of weakness or jealousy if someone voiced complaints about her. Garner, though, had nothing to prove. He had no resentment. He didn't have any plans. He was just speaking the truth, plain and honest, like he always had. And perhaps it was the reason it was so simple to overlook. There was no yelling from rooftops or press leaks from him. He was simply giving a silent warning to the next person in line, hoping that their experience would go more smoothly than his. As the stories began to mount, it became evident that Garner had not been alone, but regrettably, most people did not take that warning seriously, even though they certainly should have. The Fan is perceived by most as a low-key thriller that is creepy, fashionable, and supported by Lauren Bacall's powerful presence. The simmering tension, however, was never visible to the public. Something much less glamorous was going on behind them as the cameras rolled. Experienced actor James Garner, who has collaborated with everyone from Steve McQueen to Julie Andrews, was rarely startled by co-stars. However, he was walking a tightrope behind the Fan set. The entire set felt tight because of Bacall's attitude, which was never explicitly aggressive. Conversations were cut short, and directives became orders. Additionally, people who attempted to make comments or ideas were frequently met with cold or contemptuous responses, particularly if they questioned her authority. Later, crew members described an unavoidable dynamic. Bacall insisted on commanding not only her scenes but also the production's overall spirit. She was known to challenge judgments that didn't align with her vision, question direction, and resist rewrites. Garner, who valued efficiency and harmony, tended to keep his fury to himself, but his body language and a few words said otherwise. There were rumors that Bacall and Edward Bianchi, the film's director, had a falling out at one point. Although the specifics were never disclosed to the public, insiders suggested that Bacall's insistence on doing things her way caused friction within the crew and slowed down production. Garner, who was usually professional, tried to maintain his objectivity, but it was clear he was not having fun. It was made more complicated by Bacall's ability to flip the charm on and off. She appeared self-assured and humorous to the media. She could come out as domineering, critical, and aloof to the actors and crew. Working with someone like that is like being in a frigid room with a thermostat that never fluctuates, according to Garner. There was no flaming conflict. It was the kind that gradually wears people down, the quiet kind. Neither the gossip columns nor the cameras captured these dramatic outbursts. They were brief pauses, side remarks, snubs, and silences that made it obvious what was going on. These fights are rarely reported in the media, but those who experienced them never fail to notice them. The event taught Garner a valuable lesson. The most profound impressions are sometimes left by less obtrusive disputes. He would soon learn that he was not alone in feeling that chill, it's the quiet ones. There were other people that left Lauren Bacall feeling nervous besides James Garner. Throughout the years, a number of actors and insiders have expressed similar opinions. In private chats, green rooms, and dressing rooms, there were stories that rarely made the news. The way Bacall dealt with the strong personalities of others was one of the most revealing trends. She made no secret of the fact that no one intimidated her. Some thought her confidence was admirable, but others thought it was arrogant, even hostile. On stage, Bacall was notorious for pushing directors' bounds and arguing with co-stars who didn't share her fervor, especially during her Broadway days. Theater insiders claim that several performances saw tense rehearsals due to Bacall's insistence on managing the show her way, not due to inexperience or creative disagreements. The heat even reached seasoned artists. Citing irreconcilable creative differences, a term that frequently conceals far deeper personal conflict, one performer who had co-starred with her in a revival reportedly left the show in the middle of the production. There were rumors that Bacall's demand for control had made cooperation into a conflict. Even though the incident was never made public, it contributed to the enigmatic mythology that surrounded her private life. Brenda Vaccaro, an actress who worked in similar fields, once implied in an interview that Bacall might be hard to please when she wasn't the center of attention. The timing and context made it obvious who she was referring to, even though she never gave names. Even many who secretly appreciated Bacall's talent acknowledged that it may be draining to work with her. As one unnamed stage performer recalls, she was excellent, but when she entered, she had a way of making the air feel thinner. The issue of lifelong buddies who became distant co-workers also came up. Some of Bacall's closest connections in the industry eventually dissolved, not because of scandal or treachery, but just because maintaining a tight relationship became too emotionally taxing. She might be demanding, dominating, and quite critical, but she could also be loyal. She kept track of any slights, no matter how minor, and never let you forget them, according to an acquaintance from her early years. It was evident in her interviews as well. Bacall talked a lot about being honest, but he was selective. Often critical of others, particularly other actresses, she once told a reporter that most of them never had to struggle as hard as I did. Not only did it show her perspective, but it also revealed how she evaluated other people. Respect seemed to have to be earned the hard way for Bacall. Even so, it wasn't always given freely. Together, these testimonies, the tense relationships on stage, and the silent remarks made by actors who have experienced it all help to paint a more complete picture. The voice of Garner was not alone. A silent chorus of folks who had gone through the same cold front included him. There was no denying the pattern, even though none of them yelled it from the rooftops. That trend would soon catch up with Bacall's reputation in a way that even her admirers would find impossible to ignore. As the years went by and Lauren Bacall's career gained less attention, an unexpected development started to occur. It wasn't a crisis or a media frenzy that caused her carefully manicured image to begin to crumble, but rather the quiet honesty of time. It became more difficult to ignore the once shrouded facts about Bacall as more autobiographies were released, more interviews were rediscovered, and more veterans of the industry shared their stories. More people than anyone had expected found that James Garner's subliminal warning that she was not as simple to work with as her polished reputation implied was accurate. After the fan, other contributors started to talk more openly. The difficulties of working with Bacall were previously discussed by directors who remained silent, pointing out her rigid demeanor and propensity to control a project. One director characterized her as intelligent but unyielding, noting that she had no tolerance for compromise. In her subsequent interviews, even her fans started to detect a change in tone. Bacall became more sour in her remarks about Hollywood as she grew older. She called herself one of the last authentic actresses, trashed emerging talent, and attacked contemporary stars. Some sensed something more in her stubbornness, while others admired it. A dislike for anyone who had not experienced her time and a refusal to change. It was more than just print. During late career interviews and award show appearances, Bacall frequently came out as aloof or contemptuous, ignoring questions or correcting presenters in the middle of sentences. What used to be interpreted as confidence was now interpreted as superiority, which offended people. In silence, her mystery gave birth to a more nuanced reality. There were also the retrospectives. As movie historians started to reconsider Hollywood's heyday, a more complex perspective on Bacall surfaced. Of course, people still celebrated her. Despite her evident brilliance, presence, and impact, a more nuanced image of the untouchable Queen of Cool took its place. A woman who had battled valiantly for her position in the industry might have lost the affection of those around her as a result. James Garner was never complacent. He didn't say, "I told you so." His style wasn't like that. However, for individuals who had deciphered his narrative and recalled his caution, the pieces started to come together. Long before anyone else had, he had seen it. The emotional detachment, the power struggles, and the covert desire to dominate every space she visited. Bacall's imposing myth was a stark contrast to Garner's modest realism in a community where reputations are everything. Furthermore, the fact that he had nothing to gain by speaking it added to its impact. He wasn't trying to get attention or exact revenge. He was unable to act as though it had never occurred. And now that we have hindsight, we can finally see the whole picture. James Garner ended up not making a scene. He never tried to damage anyone's reputation, never wrote a dramatic expose, and never voiced his complaints on talk shows. He refused to act like that, but it was not who he was either. Rather than being horrific or explosive, what happened to him with Lauren Bacall left a lasting impression because it subtly revealed the price of dealing with someone who prioritized control above connection. Garner's tale is not limited to a single awkward movie set. It concerns Hollywood's broader reality. The truth is frequently obscured by that appearance, and legends are not always what they seem. Bacall was regarded as a fearless, unyielding symbol for many years. She received accolades for her courage, stubbornness, and fire. The way that same fire could scorch those around her, however, was frequently disregarded. Although she wasn't bad or evil, she was challenging. Moreover, hardship can occasionally leave scars. Garner felt and saw it, and instead of attacking, he just decided to be honest. An understated candor that eventually outlasted any headline. Perhaps it is the reason this narrative is so captivating. Not the stress or the drama, but the fact that one of Hollywood's most likable celebrities noticed something that others decided to overlook. And rather of yelling it, he whispered it, not to undermine anyone, but because someone had to say it. Therefore, the next time you hear a well-known actor make a subtle remark, raise a red flag, or share a tale that doesn't exactly fit the mainstream narrative, consider what they're actually trying to convey. Because no one listened to James Garner's warnings.